I woke up to my phone rattling on the nightstand at 4 a.m., its screen casting a pale glow across the bedroom. The same short message flashed on every local station: "Evacuate New York now." At first, it almost felt like a glitch, one of those accidental emergency test broadcasts. But my social media feed told a different story. People had posted shaky videos of something going wrong across the 5 boroughs. Blurred footage showed crowds surging through a subway station, individuals staggering in the background. Some were banging on the sealed doors of a G-train. Others stumbled along the platform in a way that made viewers lean in, trying to understand what had gone wrong. I've lived in Brooklyn for almost 9 years. My name is Miguel, or as my friends call me, Migs. And before everything turned upside down, I worked as a paramedic at New York, Presbyterian Hospital on 7th Avenue. I moved here from Buffalo for the fast pace and the energy, never once considering how an entire city could grind to a halt. My job was to help people on their worst days, but suddenly it was everyone's worst day all at once. I remember that morning vividly. When the phone alert rattled me out of bed, I shuffled across my small apartment in Park Slope, stepping over half-unpacked boxes from a recent move. I'd switched to a new place with slightly cheaper rent, and nothing felt settled yet. Soft morning light seeped through the blinds. Outside, car horns blared longer than usual. I heard someone yelling in the street, a voice echoing off the brownstone walls. I checked my messages. My phone was overheating from a flood of alerts and notifications. It was the same cryptic news repeated over and over. An unknown infection was spreading, emergency services were being overwhelmed, and city officials were urging everyone to evacuate if they could. My contacts at the hospital had sent frantic texts. "Don't come in. The ER is swamped." Some described entire floors going into lockdown. Despite the urgency, I had doubts about leaving. I knew the hospital would need every available hand. But as I scrolled through videos posted by colleagues, I realized the situation wasn't a typical hospital surge. Overcrowding was one thing, people staggering through the triage area, staff shouting for more restraints, and a snippet of footage showing a person slamming themselves against a supply closet door. That was something else entirely. In one clip, a co-worker's voice came through in a tight whisper, "Don't come here, we can't contain it." The next moment, the camera jerked and cut off. I heard sirens outside. Not the usual quick wail of a New York Police Department cruiser, but the drawn-out howling of multiple ambulances, intermixed with the sporadic roar of engines. The noise heightened, and then stopped suddenly, as if the vehicles had reached some impassable barricade. The abrupt silence that followed felt out of place. I'd grown accustomed to the constant hum of traffic, the low rumble that usually lulled me to sleep. My phone buzzed again with the same automated alert. "New York City emergency. All residents must evacuate immediately. Follow official instructions." Official instructions? I switched on the local news station. An anchor in a disheveled suit was attempting to read from a teleprompter, though he kept glancing off-screen. As he spoke, every so often he'd press his earpiece and look confused. "Reports continue to come in. Situation is developing. City officials advise." And then the feed cut, replaced by a static screen that read, "Stand by for official statements." When I peered out my window, I saw a neighbor named Carmen on her front stoop. She had tears in her eyes, a phone clutched in her hand. She waved me down. I hurried outside wearing yesterday's sweatpants and a hoodie. "Did you see the news, Migs?" she asked, voice quivering. She pointed at her phone screen. "They're telling us to get out, but the BQE is jammed solid. And I got a friend who tried crossing the Brooklyn Bridge on foot and said there was some kind of blockage." My mind flashed to all the times we had citywide warnings, like hurricanes, telling folks to evacuate or shelter in place. Usually, it was a matter of knowing if you were in a flood zone or not. This was different. The city's official instructions were basically telling everyone, "Leave if you can." But how does a metropolis of millions just empty out overnight? A rustling sound came from across the street. Another neighbor, John Mathers, and his wife Eleanor, were dragging a small bookshelf out of their apartment. They tipped it sideways and wedged it into the hallway, forming a crude barricade. That was my first real sign that the chaos we'd seen on social media was now right at our doorstep. I called out to them, "John, Elena, what's going on?" John wiped sweat from his forehead with a trembling hand. "We saw something outside last night," he said in a halting voice. "We saw a group of people near the corner store on 5th. Something was wrong with them. They weren't acting normal." Elena nodded, setting down a heavy box of miscellaneous items, books, metal rods, and random tools. They were moving in a strange way, and when someone tried to talk to them, they turned on him, started chasing him down the street. Her expression shifted as if reliving the moment. "We don't want that happening to us. The power on our block keeps flickering, and 911 was overloaded. Couldn't get through." My phone had just enough battery left to load a short text from a colleague named Martin, who worked in the ambulance dispatch center at Brooklyn Methodist Hospital. He wrote, "No help coming. City's losing control. Lock doors. Only move if certain you can escape." That chilled me more than I wanted to admit. Martin was a calm professional, the type who never panicked. If he was saying there was no help coming, that meant the city really had run out of resources. I started to think about the ambulances I'd heard earlier, the sirens that went silent. Maybe they'd been forced to stop, or something forced them to stop. Carmen tugged on my sleeve. "We need to make a decision," she said quietly. She glanced around, checking the empty street. "Are we staying or leaving? The city's saying to evacuate, but it's near impossible to do that if the roads are blocked." I told her about the text from Martin. If we can't get out quickly, we might need to barricade ourselves too, at least until we know more. Carmen pressed her lips together in thought. She had lived in the neighborhood for years, working as a pastry chef at a popular bakery down on 7th Avenue. She was a practical person, not prone to drama. The fact that she looked this alarmed pushed me toward caution as well. We agreed we'd fortify what we could, gather supplies, and see if there was a window of time to leave safely. Back inside my apartment, I flipped through old notebooks for emergency plans. As a paramedic, I'd attended disaster preparedness seminars, some focusing on large-scale outbreaks. But theory is one thing, reality is another. The official CDC guidelines hammered one point repeatedly: avoid contact with infected individuals, isolate if possible, and don't attempt to wait it out if you can secure a safe route. I stuffed a small duffel with basic medical supplies, gauze rolls, antiseptics, some airways, a stethoscope, a blood pressure cuff, gloves, and a face shield that I'd kept from my hospital shifts. Then I grabbed my phone charger, only to realize I had barely any electricity for recharging. The lights flickered again, indicating we might lose power entirely. I took stock of my kitchen. I had a few cans of beans, soup, and some bottled water. Not much for a long haul. My half-charged phone beeped again, another citywide alert. It repeated the same message: evacuate New York now. At that moment, it felt like the entire city was in a tug-of-war. On one side, the official message told us to get out as soon as possible. On the other, the roads were clogged, and even heading to Manhattan seemed like a gamble. My mind raced with every possibility. Ferry across to Staten Island? Try the Verrazano Narrows Bridge? Or maybe go north toward Westchester? But each route had the same problem. Everyone else would have thought of it too, jamming the roads in an exodus. I decided to make sure my immediate surroundings were secure. Outside my apartment door, I helped John and Elena reinforce the barricade. We used furniture, metal bars from disassembled bed frames, anything that could slow down an intruder. The hallway smelled faintly of sweat and disinfectant. The neighbor across the hall, Marcus, stuck his head out to ask what we were doing. Once we explained, he offered up his heavy oak coffee table. We wedged it against the door leading to the street. A makeshift fortress, but better than nothing. Carmen returned with her own small backpack. She carried a rolling pin from her bakery job, although it felt more symbolic than useful. "We need to think about what's happening beyond just our block," she said quietly. My friend in Queens said half the neighborhood is in total disarray. Cars smashed, people running, no real direction. I don't want that to happen here. We all peered out through a crack in the boarded-up lobby window. The street was eerily still. A few scraps of paper blew across the asphalt. A local bodega, usually open by this time, was locked up with a metal grate over the doors. No cars passed, though in the distance, I glimpsed what might have been a flicker of flames reflecting on a distant building's glass windows. Some shadowy figures moved at the far intersection, though we couldn't tell if they were ordinary folks, law enforcement, or infected. A part of me wanted to step outside and see if I could help anyone. After all, that's what I'd trained for. But the unknown dangers pushed me to reconsider. If I went out now, it could risk me coming back with something I couldn't control, or not coming back at all. By midday, the temperature rose. The humidity in the hallway made the stale air feel heavier. I rummaged through my first aid kit, taking mental note of what we had. Outside, occasional shouts echoed between buildings, faint enough that we couldn't make out the words. There was a scuffle on the sidewalk below. A group of strangers passed by, scurrying with backpacks. I watched from the second-floor window as one limped and another supported them, looking around nervously before disappearing around a corner. It was impossible to tell if they were just injured or something else was going on. John, who worked as a freelance journalist, took it upon himself to gather what intelligence he could. He set up an old battery-powered radio. Static crackled between stations. Eventually, a faint voice came through. Multiple calls from around the city. Emergency broadcast. Infection suspected to be transmitted by contact with bodily fluids. Officials urging all to remain vigilant. If you see suspicious behavior, avoid interaction and move to a safe location immediately. The broadcast continued in a grim monotone, listing various closures. The Brooklyn-Queens Expressway is at a standstill. The Lincoln Tunnel has been shut. The George Washington Bridge is experiencing severe congestion with no movement in or out. Subway service is suspended indefinitely. Eleanor exchanged looks with her husband. "This sounds like the beginning of a total city lockdown," she said, voice subdued. John sighed and rested a hand on the radio. "If it's spreading fast, we might be better off leaving on foot. But where do we go?" I remembered that some people from Manhattan had tried to walk across the Brooklyn Bridge when the train shut down, but there'd been news of a pile-up at the entrance. Rumors mentioned barricades set by the police department, but then those barricades were abandoned. A flood of terrified civilians had crammed onto the walkway. Some were injured, and others were showing the same symptoms we'd seen in the videos. As daylight shifted, the sense of time stretched. Without official guidance beyond the automated phone alerts, we felt adrift. I recalled times when the city had faced emergencies, 9/11s, Hurricane Sandy, and how there'd always been official press conferences, instructions, and volunteer efforts. Now it seemed like everything was unraveling too fast. We rationed what we had to eat. Carmen handed out pastries she'd taken from her freezer, still surprisingly fresh. Marcus offered some bottled water. We kept the windows partially open for ventilation, though we draped them with sheets to avoid drawing attention from the street. My phone's battery dipped below 20%, so I set it to airplane mode, toggling it occasionally to check for new messages. One arrived from my friend Brianna, an ER nurse at Bellevue Hospital in Manhattan. Conditions dire, shots fired outside, departments locked down. Some staff tried to leave. I'm staying to help as many as possible, but no end in sight. People moving strangely, scratching at windows. I'm safe for now. The words, "shots fired," made me set my phone down, mind racing. If parts of the city were degenerating to that level of chaos, I couldn't imagine the roads were going to be any safer. Knowing Brianna's courage, she'd probably keep working until she collapsed. Still, the idea of her stuck in a hospital that might be overrun created a sense of helplessness. I walked around our makeshift barricade to ensure everything held. The hush in the building was unnerving. Over the years, I'd become so accustomed to city noise, kids playing in the hallway, neighbors playing music. Now, An uneasy calm had settled in, a hush that was constantly broken by distant sirens echoing across neighborhoods. John tapped my shoulder. "I'm thinking of reaching out to some contacts at the local news channels, see if they have any updates. Maybe they're broadcasting from secure locations." He tried calling, but the cell network was spotty. Half the calls didn't connect. When he finally got through to a friend at NY1, all he heard was a brief moment of static, followed by a rushed sentence. "Brooklyn Bridge approach. Not safe. Turned back." The line dropped. Suddenly, we heard a noise echo from the lower floor, a faint thud. Everyone froze. Carmen tightened her grip on the rolling pin, and Elena clutched a wooden broomstick. We stared at each other, uncertain what we'd find if we investigated. Marcus mouthed, "We need to check." We crept quietly down a few steps, hugging the walls. At the landing, a corridor led to the front lobby. The door we'd barricaded still looked intact, but the handle jiggled. Through the small glass pane, I glimpsed an arm attempting to reach in. The person's fingernails scratched against the metal plate, as if searching for a way to pry it open. Their movements were slow, almost uncoordinated, but persistent. John gestured for us to hold back. We kept a careful distance, uncertain if it was a regular person or someone infected. From the radio reports, we'd learned that infection could spread with a single bite or even contact with open wounds. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the arm withdrew. A low scraping sound trailed off, then nothing. Eleanor let out a long exhale. We regrouped upstairs, each aware that our building was no longer off the radar. If one infected had found it, more might follow. Our block stayed unusually quiet, as if the city itself was holding its breath. I thought about family and friends scattered across the boroughs, some in Queens, some in the Bronx. No word from most of them. My older sister, Luciana, taught elementary school in the Lower East Side. She had texted me the night before, writing, "Something weird happening. Principal told us to stay put until we hear from the DOE." Now her phone went straight to voicemail. Time blurred. I sat in the dim hallway light, recalling protocols for large-scale disasters. Usually you set up triage centers, establish a chain of command, coordinate with the National Guard. But from what I'd seen, any kind of unified response was already overwhelmed. I wondered if the mayor or the governor was even in the city anymore. John returned to fiddling with the radio. We caught a scratchy broadcast that might have been from a station in New Jersey. The announcer urged people there to avoid traveling east. From the tone, it sounded like they considered New York City a lost cause. Another station played a looped message about contacting FEMA for assistance, but there was no direct communication channel. They must have been broadcasting from somewhere outside the immediate crisis. When evening arrived, the tension spiked. The city skyline, usually bright with lights, dimmed in large sections. Power failures spread. The sky over Manhattan had a strange orange hue, possibly from scattered fires. I climbed to the rooftop to get a clearer view. Up there, the air felt cooler, but it also carried distant noise, sirens, a faint rumble of chaos. Standing on the tarred roof, I spotted a glow near the waterfront, possibly near Red Hook. Columns of smoke rose in the direction of the piers. More plumes drifted over in what must have been Midtown Manhattan. The roads below snaked with a few functioning headlights, but mostly it was a jumble of stationary vehicles. Just then, I noticed movement on a nearby rooftop. A solitary figure standing near the ledge, partially hidden by a small AC unit. Their posture was tense. I couldn't tell if they were looking at me or scanning the horizon. Before I could move, they ducked out of view. It was impossible to say if they were a fellow survivor seeking vantage or something else entirely. Back inside, Carmen and Elena worked on creating a more livable space in the hallway. Marcus found old battery-powered lanterns in the basement. We ate in hushed conversation, each of us glancing at the dark windows. We said little about what tomorrow might bring, but the air bristled with the knowledge that we couldn't stay indefinitely. Even if we survived the infected, We'd run out of supplies. I volunteered for the first watch shift. It felt like every shadow in the corridor might conceal a threat. My eyes darted toward the slightest noise. Occasionally I heard shuffling outside, or the faint resonance of a distant car alarm. Once or twice a scream echoed through the streets, then cut off abruptly. At some point, around midnight, Elena joined me with a thermos of lukewarm tea. She tried to keep spirits up, mentioning how, in times of crisis, neighborhoods had banded together before. "Remember the blackout of 2003? She asked in a hushed tone. "People came out and helped direct traffic, shared flashlights." She trailed off, realizing this was nothing like a typical blackout. I flipped through notes on a small notepad, trying to piece together a plan. If we attempted to leave by foot, maybe we could skirt the main roads, use side streets, cut through Prospect Park. But what if Prospect Park was overrun? And even if we got beyond the city, where would we go? The phone lines offered no clarity, just repeated warnings to evacuate. Without any indication of a safe zone, we'd be wandering blindly. The next morning, we woke to the building's power completely out. No electricity, no running water, and our cell phones on their last dregs of battery. The radio station that had been broadcasting went silent overnight, leaving us with only the random distant transmissions of other stations that we could occasionally tune into. We had to consider the possibility of making a break for it. Supplies were dwindling, and the city was definitely not stable. While rummaging through my closet, I found a small crowbar I'd bought years ago for prying open crates during volunteer cleanup efforts. I tucked it into my duffel. Carmen sharpened the handle of a broken mop to fashion some kind of defensive stick. It felt surreal, preparing for confrontation in the middle of Brooklyn. Marcus announced he was going to try checking the corner bodega for more water. We decided he shouldn't go alone, so John volunteered. The rest of us would stay put, scanning from windows. We tried to dress them in a way that minimized skin exposure, long sleeves, gloves. Even though it was hot, we didn't want to risk direct contact if something went wrong. Before they left, I handed them a small first aid pouch. They exited through the barricaded entrance, carefully moving aside just enough furniture to slip through. The rest of us positioned ourselves at windows overlooking the street. It was quiet, though we spotted a couple of distant figures crossing an intersection. They moved slowly, not in the usual purposeful gait of a typical passerby. We couldn't tell if they were injured or infected. John and Marcus reached the bodega and disappeared inside. A tense few minutes passed. My hands lingered near the window frame. Suddenly, John emerged, looking back as if calling to Marcus. They both hurried out carrying a box and a bag. Then, a silhouette stepped into the frame, a man with a torn jacket, stumbling in their direction. John pivoted to avoid him, but the figure lurched forward. From my vantage point, the stumbling man's motions seemed disjointed, like limbs barely under his control. Marcus tried shouting something, possibly telling the man to stay back. The man reached out, and John raised a metal rod in a defensive posture. There was no sound from up here, but I could imagine the tension. They backed away carefully. The figure swayed, hesitated, then moved out of sight. Seconds later, John and Marcus dashed back toward our building. We helped them slip inside as quietly as possible. They set down their haul, some water bottles, canned goods, and a few snack bars. Marcus muttered that the bodega owner was nowhere to be found, the place half ransacked already. They'd only taken what was left that seemed untouched. John described the encounter. That guy, I don't think he was just an ordinary person. He was moving in a way that seemed off. When we tried to speak, he gave no reaction, like he couldn't even understand us. It was only when we backed away that he made that clumsy reach. "Did he touch either of you?" I asked, noticing John's trembling hand. John shook his head firmly. "No contact. We kept our distance." Marcus confirmed it. "We're good, but it was close." Elena and Carmen started organizing the newly acquired supplies. We decided to ration the water, not knowing how long it would be until we found more. The city's main water supply was probably still intact, but without power to run pumps, we couldn't rely on the building's taps. A few apartments had bottled water, but it wouldn't last forever. We gathered in the hallway, the morning light falling through boarded windows. The group collectively recognized that staying here indefinitely wasn't viable. The official message to evacuate still lingered, and we had no clue whether outside help would ever arrive. Marcus suggested heading towards the Staten Island ferry terminal in Manhattan, hoping to cross the East River on foot and then find a ferry or boat out of the city. But we'd heard rumors that ferry service was suspended, and the area might be swarmed with desperate evacuees. Elena mentioned trying the Kosciuszko Bridge to get into Queens, then going north toward Long Island. But I worried about getting stuck in Queens with no clear path out. Plus, the radio broadcasts implied conditions there were equally precarious. Carmen pointed out that if we made it to the Holland Tunnel, maybe we could move into New Jersey, though there were also reports that the tunnel was barricaded or flooded with vehicles. We debated each option, none of them particularly good. Finally, John said, maybe we can aim for one of the smaller bridges, like the Pulaski Bridge from Greenpoint into Long Island City. It might be less crowded than the main roads. We considered that. None of us had definite intel on the conditions there, but it was as plausible a route as any. That afternoon, we decided it was worth trying to move out at first light the next day. We'd plan a route, pack the essentials, and hope to slip through the city before things got worse. We spent the rest of the day dividing up supplies into backpacks, water bottles, canned food, first aid, flashlights, and a portable radio that still had some battery life. I scribbled a rough route on a piece of paper. Travel north through Park Slope, up toward Williamsburg. From Williamsburg, push into Greenpoint. Attempt the Pulaski Bridge into Queens. See if we can continue north or find a safe corridor out of the city. We decided we would avoid big highways and known choke points, sticking to smaller streets. If we saw large clusters of people, we'd divert to side roads. The infection seemed to spread where crowds gathered, so staying away from potential mobs was our best bet. Sleep was sporadic. Carmen tried to lighten the mood with stories from her bakery. She described how busy life had been just a week ago. Wedding cake orders, tourists lining up for croissants. The memory of normalcy made the current situation feel even more surreal. John wrote in a small journal, determined to document everything. He said, "If we make it out, people will need to know what happened here." His pen scratched the paper methodically. I tried to rest in my living room, a single candle flickering on the coffee table. My thoughts wandered to the hospital, to Brianna, to my friends who might still be out there. I wondered if they'd tried to evacuate or if they'd chosen to stay. Everything felt uncertain, but we had to keep moving forward. Even the walls of my own apartment felt confining now. We left just before dawn. The sky was a dull grey, the sun not yet visible. We crept past the dismantled barricade and onto the street. Our footsteps were muted on the pavement. Each of us carried a makeshift tool for defense. John had his metal rod, Carmen her rolling pin, Marcus a sturdy pipe he found in the basement, and I had the crowbar. Elena held the broomstick, though her knuckles were white around its handle. The streets told a story of panic and abandonment. Cars with open doors, some idling with no driver, trash scattered everywhere, shop windows broken as if people had forced entry in search of goods. We proceeded carefully, checking each corner before advancing. As we passed a familiar diner, I recalled happy breakfasts of pancakes and coffee after a late-night shift at the hospital. Now, the place was shuttered, windows shattered, the inside ransacked. The smell of spoiled food wafted out. I tried not to dwell on it. We had to stay focused. A few blocks north, near the Grand Army Plaza, we came across a small group of people. They stood in the open, scanning the area. We paused, unsure whether to approach. One of them spotted us and raised an arm. "Hey, over here!" My instincts as a paramedic told me to see if they were injured or needed help, but I also knew we couldn't risk a confrontation. We advanced slowly, maintaining distance. The man who called out wore a once clean suit, now dirt-stained. He introduced himself as Trevor. Beside him were two women, Leah and Morgan, both carrying backpacks. Trevor spoke with a hesitant tone. "We've been trying to find a route out, but everything's blocked." He pointed toward Flatbush Avenue. "That way's a mess. Cars piled up. People turned on each other." John glanced at me, silently asking if we should trust them. I saw no signs of suspicious behavior. They appeared just as scared and exhausted as we were. We compared notes on directions. Trevor mentioned they'd tried going through Fort Greene but heard gunfire. They turned back. It seemed our path toward Williamsburg might still be open, though likely fraught with challenges. We decided to band together for safety in numbers. It felt risky, but alone, each group would be more vulnerable. Strength in unity might give us a better chance of handling unexpected threats. We navigated block by block. Sometimes, we heard glass crunch underfoot, or the distant clang of metal. On Union Avenue, a few abandoned police cruisers sat with doors wide open, lights still flashing. No sign of the officers. We spotted an ambulance near an intersection, half on the sidewalk, but it too was abandoned. All the doors were ajar, the interior in disarray. This image gripped me, recalling the times I'd been the one in that ambulance, responding to emergencies. Now it was an unspoken symbol of how even first responders couldn't hold the line. We kept moving. Occasional figures loomed on distant corners. If they wandered aimlessly, we veered away. We never got close enough to see if they were infected or just dazed survivors. Once, we noticed a small group that seemed more coordinated, calling out to each other. Unsure if they were hostile or friendly, we skirted around a series of parked trucks to avoid detection. As we neared Williamsburg, we noticed more signs of recent struggles. Debris lined the sidewalks. Some storefronts had barricades, with signage scrawled in marker. "Keep out, we're armed," or "No more supplies." The atmosphere was thick with tension. Morgan looked at these warnings with a tight expression, making sure to keep her hands visible, as if expecting someone to pop out and challenge us. Our original plan was to head for the Pulaski Bridge, but we debated momentarily whether the Williamsburg Bridge itself might be open. If we could cross directly into Manhattan, maybe we could slip to the west side and try for the tunnels. But Trevor had heard from a passing group that the Williamsburg Bridge was heavily congested with vehicles and people, some of whom were definitely infected. We stuck to the Pulaski plan. Approaching McCarran Park, we heard a burst of noise, like the distant echo of a scuffle. We slowed, scanning the area. The park stretched before us, a patch of green with walkways. We saw a handful of figures near the playground, but they were too far away to identify. One stumbled, then the group converged around it. It was impossible to tell what was happening, but the shapes moved in a chaotic dance, arms jostling and flailing. We retreated quietly, taking a detour through the side streets. Eventually, we spotted the approach to the Pulaski Bridge. A sign read, "Queens this way," though no traffic flowed. The bridge rose ahead, offering a view of the water. Unfortunately, the entrance was blocked by a line of stalled cars, bumper to bumper, as if they'd tried to flee en masse. Some engines were still running, out of fuel, or left in idle until they sputtered out. We weaved between them, staying low. A faint moan drifted across the row of cars. It could have been someone injured. My impulse was to check, but Carmen gestured for me to hold position. We edged around a van with smashed windows. Inside, the seats were torn, no sign of the occupants. As we advanced, a silhouette emerged on the other side, a woman wearing a torn jacket. She looked up suddenly, eyes glazed and vacant. Her left arm had a patch of red, though it was dried and darkened, suggesting an old wound. She staggered a few steps toward us. I whispered for the group to move back. The woman's posture was off balance, and her expression didn't register fear or surprise, only a kind of blank fixation. Marcus took a step forward, lifting his pipe defensively. We gave the woman plenty of space, backing slowly. She continued a wavering pursuit, as if drawn by our presence. We angled around the cars, trying to keep one or two vehicles between us and her. She reached out at random intervals, nearly toppling over at times. Finally, she lost interest, or the capacity to track us, drifting away toward the far side of the bridge. Our group regrouped near the guardrail. Leah bit her lip, scanning the water below. No working boats in sight. A few were docked, apparently abandoned, but they were far out of reach. The Pulaski Bridge overhead walkway seemed passable, so we started across. Below, the waters of Newtown Creek were still, reflecting the hazy sky. The smell of industrial runoff lingered in the air, reminding me that even if we found a boat, traveling these waters might be toxic in the best of times. We pressed on, carefully stepping around debris. Pieces of luggage, scattered clothing, and personal items lay strewn about as if people had dropped them mid-flight. The emptiness felt oppressive. Reaching the Queen's side, we saw rows of low-rise buildings, warehouses, and older residential blocks. The roads were similarly empty, with an occasional figure moving in the distance. The plan was to continue north, hopefully finding a clearer path out. But we still had to figure out if we wanted to pass through Long Island City or swing east toward Woodside and Astoria. Trevor suggested Astoria, recalling it might be less congested, and the RFK bridge could eventually lead to the Bronx or Randall's Island. We weighed our options, uncertain which route might have fewer infected. In the end, we chose the Astoria route. We had enough water for maybe another day, but we'd need more eventually. Some of the group worried about leaving the city entirely. Where would we get help? Where was the next hospital that wasn't overrun? There were no easy answers. Near a row of shuttered auto shops, we encountered two men wearing what looked like partial New York Police Department uniforms. They were missing hats, and one's uniform was smeared with dust. They waved us down from behind a barricade of piled tires. We approached cautiously, but they identified themselves as Officer Morales and Officer Jacobs from the 94th Precinct. They said their precinct station had been completely compromised and they'd evacuated with some civilians. They were guarding a small safe house down the block. We paused to verify their legitimacy. They showed us their badges, though in such chaos it was hard to be certain of anything. Still, they seemed genuine, tired, battered, and anxious to protect a few survivors who'd banded together. We decided to check out their safe house, a former mechanic's garage with a roll-up door. Inside, we found about half a dozen people, an older couple, a middle-aged woman, and 3 young men. They had basic supplies and were trying to fortify the space. Officer Morales explained that they'd been in communication with a nearby group of firefighters from Fire Department Ladder 128, but contact was lost earlier that morning. They were hoping to reconnect, or at least form a route to move everyone out together. Jacobs asked if we'd heard any official updates, but we only had the same repeated evacuation alerts. We exchanged information. Our plan was to keep heading north, hoping to find an open path. They told us the roads toward LaGuardia Airport were blocked by crashed vehicles and roaming infected, so that wasn't an option. They urged caution in crossing Steinway Street, as it had become a choke point for large crowds a day ago. We considered staying, but with so many people gathered in one place, the risk might be higher if infected found them. In the end, we thanked them for the info and decided to move on before nightfall. They offered us a couple of extra water bottles, a gesture of generosity that was rare in these circumstances. Officer Morales repeated that if we found a secure route, we should try to signal them. The sense of community in that small garage reminded me of the best parts of being in New York. People looking out for each other. But we had to keep going. Making our way through Astoria felt surreal. The neighborhood that once bustled with restaurants, bars, and shops was mostly deserted. A few places still had boarded-up windows with signs reading, "Closed until further notice." Some roads were blocked by haphazard barricades. A few city buses lined up to prevent vehicle access. At one intersection, we noticed a city bus with tinted windows. Several outlines moved inside, but no one stepped out. A vague shape slid along the glass, leaving a trail of smears. It was hard to interpret from outside, but we didn't linger to investigate. We cut through a side street, glimpsing inside a small playground. Swings rocked idly in the breeze. A child's toy lay abandoned in the mulch. It struck a nerve, thinking about families caught in this catastrophe. We all moved faster, the emptiness of the playground leaving us unsettled. Our goal was to see if we could cross the Kennedy Bridge, formerly the Triborough Bridge, into the Bronx or Randall's Island. As we neared the approach, we spotted signs of a serious conflict. Burned-out vehicles and remnants of barricades lined the entrance. The scent of ash hung in the air, and the asphalt bore dark marks. We didn't see any large gatherings, but the area gave off a warning vibe. It had been a battleground. Part of the highway ramp was blocked by a jackknifed truck, making it impossible for cars to pass. We carefully maneuvered around it on foot, stepping over scattered metal pieces. In the distance, something moved. A small cluster of individuals near the toll booths. They seemed to be rummaging through the toll plaza, but their abrupt motions raised concern. We froze, watching them from a safe distance. Eventually, they drifted away, continuing across the plaza without noticing us. We quietly inched forward. The entrance to the pedestrian walkway of the RFK bridge was twisted from some impact. An overhead sign leaned precariously. We tested the walkway, found it still passable, though partially blocked by debris. Our group paused. Leah asked, "Do we really want to cross? What if the Bronx is worse?" We had no concrete intel on conditions there. Some official sources had hinted the infection spread widely, but turning back wasn't an option either. We made the call to proceed, stepping onto the walkway. From there, the city skyline loomed behind us, large sections dark. Smoke trailed into the sky, and the East River looked calm but foreboding. An occasional helicopter passed overhead, too high to identify. Possibly military or news choppers. No rescue from them, apparently. The walkway itself was long and silent, each footstep echoing. Mid-bridge, we paused to take in the expanse. The wind carried a mix of city odors, brine from the water, lingering exhaust fumes, and that faint chemical tang from scattered fires. Manhattan's tall buildings stood in the distance like watchful sentinels. Once we reached Randall's Island, we decided to check if the area around the sports fields or the Icon Stadium was being used as any kind of evacuation center. We found it deserted, with a few vehicles parked oddly. Some tents stood near a baseball diamond, possibly set up hastily, but no sign of activity. It felt like an abandoned camp. We did, however, discover a small trove of water bottles near what looked like a supply station, enough to refill ourselves. We took only what we needed, leaving the rest in case someone else came along. The morality of survival weighed on us. Hoarding supplies could mean denying them to others, but we had to look out for our group too. We scouted around, eventually deciding to continue toward the Bronx side of the RFK bridge. This was the last leg, leading into the Mott Haven area. From there, we hoped to push north. Maybe we could reach highways leading upstate or find an official checkpoint. The city's alerts had originally told everyone to evacuate in any direction, but we had no illusions left about the challenges. Reaching the Bronx was another shift in atmosphere. Fewer tall buildings, more open space in some areas, but also sections that felt deserted. We noticed distant columns of smoke rising from a place that could have been the Yankee Stadium area. Sirens still drifted from random directions, though not as frequently now. We stuck to side streets once more, avoiding potential hotspots. At times, we glimpsed groups of people turning corners or vanishing behind buildings. We had no idea if they were armed, infected, or simply lost. The city had fractured into small pockets of survivors. Our progress felt achingly slow. Every block had the potential for unseen threats. We tried to help each other maintain vigilance without using direct words that might give away panic. Instead, I'd see Carmen grip her rolling pin in a tighter stance when we heard sudden noises. Leah would pause at each intersection, scanning quickly. Even small acts of caution spoke volumes about our collective unease. By late afternoon, we found ourselves near an old industrial strip close to the major Deegan Expressway. The roads were clogged with vehicles. A collapsed section of highway overhead made the route impassable by car. The entire place felt like a labyrinth of twisted metal. We set up a temporary rest spot in the corner of an old warehouse. Inside, large crates lay scattered. Some rummaging revealed nothing particularly useful, just shipping materials, a broken pallet jack. We decided to spend the night there before moving on. Our plan was to skirt the western edges of the Bronx, maybe find a less traveled route out. I used this downtime to check in with everyone. "How are we holding up?" I asked, careful not to mention physical fatigue or fear directly. The group exchanged tired looks. No one said they wanted to give up. It was an unspoken determination that, despite everything, we'd keep going. Part of me was deeply worried. Even if we left the city, how far did this crisis extend? I sat on a crate, flipping through notes in my notepad. I'd been jotting down every observation: locations blocked, potential safe spots, encounters with infected. It felt like a medical log turned city survival diary. In quieter moments, I remembered what the city used to be like. The vibrant subways, the street food, the constant pulse of life. Now the subways were a place of terror, the station entrances sealed off or swarmed with unknown dangers. John, ever the journalist, recorded a few lines in his own notebook. Carmen sat against the wall, rolling a small rubber ball between her palms, a stress habit from her pastry chef days. Marcus toyed with the idea of building a small signal fire if we found a vantage point, though the rest of us cautioned it might draw more trouble than help. As the night stretched on, the flicker of a small lantern revealed the exhaustion etched on everyone's faces. Yet no one voiced despair. In the morning, we'd press on, searching for a road that led beyond the city limits. Maybe up toward Westchester, or even further. We hoped to find a relief station, a National Guard outpost, anything. Despite the dire circumstances, I recalled small acts of kindness along the way. The officers who gave us water, the cautious wave from a stranger who quietly pointed us away from a dangerous street. Even in chaos, fragments of humanity survived. At one point, Trevor quietly said, "If we make it out, we'll have a story no one will believe." And that struck me as both sad and true. This ordeal felt like something from a nightmare, but it was our daily reality now. I won't say we found a miraculous rescue, or that the city magically recovered. This account stops here, in a makeshift campsite in the Bronx. The next stage uncertain. The phone alerts still pop up occasionally with the same directive: evacuate New York now. But for many, it's already too late, or too complicated, or too dangerous to act on those words. It's a message broadcast into a void, an echo of authority that can't reach the pockets of survivors huddled behind barricades. Yet, we persist. Each sunrise brings a chance to navigate another segment of this vast urban maze. Our group remains vigilant, stepping cautiously through quiet streets, scanning each alley before proceeding, listening for anything out of place. We don't talk about fear in words, but our every movement is shaped by it. Slow, deliberate progress, mindful of each step. If there's one thing that keeps me going, it's the thought that somewhere, across the rivers and highways, there's still a part of the world that's functioning. Maybe the infection hasn't spread everywhere. Maybe there's a chance for real rescue or a safe zone. Until we confirm that, I'll keep my crowbar close and my eyes on the road ahead. This is the best record I can provide of our experiences up to this point. It's real, it's messy, and it doesn't end with a neat resolution. But it's happening, right here, in the heart of a city that once felt invincible. And maybe, if someone else finds these words later, they'll understand what went on behind the headlines and frantic broadcasts. They'll know we tried to stay human in a place that was becoming something else entirely. For now, this is our truth. We are survivors moving through an emptied metropolis, responding to that urgent, automated voice that keeps pushing out the same words. We've seen how quickly that directive can become impossible to fulfill. And still, we move forward. One block, one street, one glimpse of hope at a time. That's all for now. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more unsettling creepypastas. Your support keeps my channel alive. Until next time, stay quiet, stay vigilant, and trust nothing, not even the silence.